Welcome to another episode here at lightingbot.com. For those who don't know about it or are new to Lightingbot, we are a community of artists who are interested in learning about lighting. It can be lighting for movies, games, animation. It can be look development, can be anything really. And if you're a 3D artist, I mean, you got to light your props, you got to do something to present your portfolio. So it is relevant regardless of you being a lighting artist or not. So a quick reminder, we have a portfolio review, which you can attend and submit to. We have community highlights where we occasionally, granted I've been not very good at keeping this part up, but we do highlight people on our social media. We do have Unreal tutorials under development, a bit slow at the moment, by Sorab, who is a technical artist. And we have Unity tutorials by me, which is progressing slowly at least. And we also have lighting mentorship for those who are looking to learn. We have me in Unreal and Unity. We have other people for Unreal. We do have someone for Maya and Arnold as well. And hopefully we can attract more people to teach at our community. And don't forget, we have quite a few interviews, probably one of the largest one in the community online now. So there's a lot to watch. Now, with that intro out of the way, let's welcome Lucas into the interview here and find out how we pronounce his last name as well. Hey, man.
How you going?
How you doing?
I'm good.
I forgot to ask you, how do you pronounce your last name?
It's Pozzey with a
Pozzey.
very short O. Yes.
Pozzey. All right, cool. It's is that a British? Where does it come from?
It's actually an Italian name, but my grandfather changed it. So it used to be Pozzi, and it was pronounced Pozzi, which is a proper Italian name. And then he was in World War II and fighting for Australia, and he didn't want to be an Italian, so he tricked everybody and he changed it. So now we have the only name Pozzey like this in the world. So
all right, are you fully Italian or partially Italian or?
no, I mean his grandfather was from the border of like Switzerland and Italy, and they came over in 1850s, and then we've been Australian ever since.
Nice. Wow.
But yeah,
that's cool. So, Lucas, tell a little bit about yourself. What are you doing these days?
well, I sit in my room and I like things. No, I'm working at NPC at the moment. I was at NPC for Lion King and Mandalorian and a show called Cats that no one's ever heard of, and then now back again at NPC Episodic. So it's sort of a lot of the same people, but a new branch. Yeah, I've sort of been around London for the last 5 years or so, different studios, mainly DNEG and NPC.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is interesting. I was going to ask you because, I mean, you got your bachelor degrees in 2003, I believe, and it was in film and television production on directing, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you started. I see you're in Sweden. I'm actually Norwegian, and I can see you have a Norwegian flag in your pillow below behind as well. I just noticed it. So what happened there? You started obviously in a different direction and not necessarily lighting. Let's talk a little bit about that journey from the beginning and up to now.
Yeah, yeah. Ironically, during that course, there were a lot of Norwegian students. I don't know why, but like half of our class was from Norway.
Wow.
And yeah, I had some really good friends from Sweden. That's how I ended up shooting and filming in Sweden. But
that makes sense actually, because Norway isn't the best place to learn at that time anyway.
Yeah, and actually, the government paid for all of the fees, so all Norwegian students just went somewhere else. It was amazing.
Party.
They were like, let's have a party at my huge apartment, and we're like, what? But anyway, yeah. So basically, I came from live action, so I had a fairly unique path into visual effects. It took me quite a while to sort of get into this world. I sort of started making films myself and independently, and then I studied direction, and did sort of cinematography and sound while I was at uni, and then kind of just rolled onto that. Did a lot of stuff in Brisbane where I went to uni. Ended up working for some TV networks, doing some episodic TV, and then my friend who I knew from uni was directing a film in Sweden, so he asked me if I wanted to come and shoot it because I'd been doing a little bit of DP work as well. So I said yes, and ended up for a year shooting an independent film in Helsingborg in the south of Sweden. And that was really fun. That was really interesting. So yeah, it never really it was released in Denmark and Sweden. I don't know if it went to Norway, but it did pretty well in Sweden. Like we came out the same time as Spiderman 3, and I think we were number 3 at the box office.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Norway is a small country, bro. It's like, I think at the moment it's like 7 million or something. It's just a whole country, and the country is bigger than the UK. It's not like 3 times bigger than the UK or
Yeah.
something. 4
Yeah.
times. It's funny the difference in population, but yeah, it's quite a track record as well. It's quite impressive as well. I mean, done a lot, so there's a lot to talk about. So what I want to capture first is the fact that you study cinematography. How much do you think you benefited from studying cinematography in terms of going over from cinematography related context over to lighting, if that makes sense? Like, what's the connection, and do you think it was a valuable thing to learn first?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I there's not a single day that goes by that I don't rely on those skills. In terms of like composition, the way that cameras work, the way that light works, all of that knowledge I have from live action. And that was something that made it a lot easier for me when I finally did move into visual effects, that I've always had the ability to pre-think what the image should look like. So if somebody says, like this scene, preferably that helps me a lot because I come from live action, that I can talk to a director or a supervisor and they will say like, this is a very emotional scene, or this is a scene where the young lion has lost his dad and he sees him in the clouds. That is a very emotional moment, and it's a very iconic thing. So that's something that I can see in my head how it should feel and how it should be lit and how it would be shot. Whereas I think that if you come from a more technical side, it's a lot harder to get to that point. You can like sort of trial and error, and you can experiment, and that's fine. And I know a lot of great artists who go that way and are able to sort of like work their way up to that beautiful image. But for me, it's like I know what it looks like, and I sort of just move the tools in that direction until I get it.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's definitely my background in
All right.
cinematography that's coming forward.
Okay. For the record, for the people, some of the stuff you can read the description. I listed most of his work in the description, but Thor 2, The Dark World, I watched it. Captain America 2, Winter Soldier, watched it. Guardian of the Galaxy, watched it. Avengers: Age of Ultron, watched it. Ant-Man, watched it. The Last Wish Hunter, watched it. Deadpool, watched it. So I mean, there's quite a Lion King. I watched Mission Impossible. I watched Justice League, Pacific Rim, Uprising, Wonder Woman. I mean, you have quite an extensive list. So what have you learned? I mean, you started quite early. I mean, you started at the same time I took a break from everything creative. You started the lighting part around 2013, 2012, which is the same time I had to take a break and had a burnout. And during that time, during the time I wasn't doing a lot actively, you did quite a lot. I think you did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You did a lot. So I'm interested to know, when you do a lot of these projects, and the difference here, of course, is during the time at Luma Pictures, at least, when you're doing lighting, compositor, and layout artist. First, do you want to explain the differences between the three, since you also made the difference yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that relates to the previous questions, that I came into the industry, and when I started at Fuel, which is an incredible company in Sydney, they hired me not knowing any computer programs or anything, and they taught me a lot of the stuff that I know, and basically like they wanted somebody who understood cameras and who understood lighting from live action, and someone they could sit on set, and that's basically how I got the job. Um, so when I came in, like what inspired me to get involved into visual effects was I saw Wall-E, and I saw how beautiful it could be, and I'd never seen anything fully CG that was so cinematic, like that was so beautifully lit. And I found out that obviously Roger Deakins was a consultant on at Pixar at the time, working with them on those Earth sequences. And I thought, well, why doesn't everybody do that? Like, why don't you have more cinematographers like work with animators and visual effects artists? And that's kind of how I moved into it. And Fuel, they sort of saw that potential as well, and I did that a lot on some of the commercials we were doing in the early days. And then they unfortunately closed down, and I was hired at Luma when they were setting up in Melbourne. And that was kind of how I presented there as well. I said, well, what if I was able to, you know, start with the cameras and sort of take it through? And the first show that we did there, I Frankenstein, great film. um, we did most of it. Like it was some serious changes on the film, and we kind of did this full CG like the last 30 minutes of the film, I guess. And it was a very small crew, and we worked really hard, like a very small crew of really talented artists. But that was it. Like I got to sort of like we were even doing some previous stuff that was changing, carried the cameras all the way like with the animators, and then started lighting and compositing shots as well. So you know, it got to be like a whole. And what I said was like, this is what a DOP would do. Like you, when you're on set, you are in charge of the camera, and you're also overseeing the lighting, and you're also overseeing like how the final image will look, and that's what a director of photography does. So I figured, why isn't that a thing in visual effects? You know, it's just because it's too much work. It's too much for one person to do.
Right.
So yeah, I guess like how I would explain it is layout to me is what I've tended to do is lensing. Like, you know, when I started doing layout, I would go on set and I'd come back and I'd recreate the set. So, you know, if there was a table and a chairs that somebody sits at, I would build that in 3D, and then we'd use that to track, and we'd use that to line up any CG characters and whatever. In terms of lensing, that sort of started on Prometheus. You know, we were doing sort of tests with some of the hologram sequences that were basically, we had a lidar of the whole caves, and we'd have like a hologram, and I would do like certain camera moves and things, and we'd present that to the director, and sort of like that was how we developed certain effect shots and things like that. So yeah, like as I went through my process at Luma, I sort of like, after a while, our projects sort of forced me more into compositing, and I kind of didn't. I reacted against that, just because it's sort of like a lot of the time compositing is just fixing things that haven't been done properly because you haven't had time, or there's been a change of mind at some point. So
Someone wasn't doing their job properly.
yeah, probably the lighter. But yeah, like, you know, that was the thing. And yeah, I guess a lot of the time I was lighting and composing at the same time, so I could only blame myself. But that's just the way it is. And I just wanted to have more of an overarching.
So basically, you were fixing your own mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, Friday, Lucas, I hate you. I still say that.
That's funny. Yeah, you're doing the lighting, then you're fixing it afterwards. That's
Yeah. Just
interesting
put a different
combination.
hat on. That's fine.
Was it too much though? Because you were doing three things. You're doing the lighting, the compositing, and the layouting during that time. And it was for most of this project that I named, or just some of it?
Yeah, it varied from project to project. I mean, Luma is very action packed. You know, like it's. I always think that like my say 4 years at Luma were like 8 years anywhere else, because you know, not only are you working twice as much,
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of shows and a lot of shots per day. Like we're doing a full day. Like everyone, you start working, and that's it. And you're getting stuff out, and everyone's dedicated to making like it look great. And that's sort of what you do, and you just sort of get into it, and you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna work myself until I do this properly. And I didn't realize until I left that it didn't have to be like that. But it was a great experience. Like, you know, like in terms of as being an artist, like it's great if you're a young artist and you want to like prove yourself and get to work on stuff that you probably wouldn't. Like, you know, you could work at a big studio and it might be 5 years before you get a big shot. You know,
Yeah.
and pretty much my my first shot on I Frankenstein that I composited was like this massive full CG chasm with like metal bars and a fireball gargoyle angel coming to fight like a demon and like crashing. It's like the
Yeah, yeah.
craziest stuff that even now I would be, you know, I'd be honored to kind of get a shot like that, you know.
Yeah, it makes sense because I did talk to a couple of others who were like doing Lego stuff and a couple of other stuff. And I remember because they're obviously still beginners compared to you, and they were like assigned to do like very specific shots, a very specific type of lighting. They were really given, I guess, the trust or something to do like the whole, I don't remember the term that you guys use in the movie CG pop, but he wasn't entrusted necessarily to do like the whole lighting from scratch. This was more like very specific type of
Right.
lighting or fixes, or like it was a specific shot, not the whole sequence, for example, and or he had to like do the fixes as you say more than anything, and then eventually, I guess the idea is you will learn stuff by doing the compositing, and then it will improve you or something. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you think that is the right order of having juniors do stuff, or do you think juniors should be allowed to just get into it right away?
I mean, it depends on the junior. I think that like I think there's definitely a tendency, but honestly, it's not even just juniors. Like I've had experiences where, you know, like with all my experience, I'll show up at a new studio and they won't trust me to even light a really simple shot. Like they won't even trust me to know like which lights to use. You know what I mean? Like it can get like that because, you know, and it's about trust. Like, and that's every film that you ever work on. Like, people need to know that you're able to do the work that you
Hmm.
can do. And often, and I find this in the big studios, like no one's going to look at your IMDb, no one's going to look at your LinkedIn. Like when you start working with them, they're just going to be like, here's a person that somebody put on my show, and I have to give them some work. And you know, that's sort of how it goes. And you sort of have to prove yourself every show that you work on.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
still get that, you know, like
you
even
can keep
and you know,
you can keep
sorry.
talking a little bit. I'm just gonna quickly run over here and turn the light. I can see my lighting in the back. I'm trying to find a
Oh,
way to
nice.
counter. I'm becoming like a god in the background here for some reason. It's insane.
Yeah, Close Encounters.
Uh, I suppose.
But yeah,
So, would you say? Let's see. Maybe you can just make it darker for now. Would you say that during your time, what advice would you have given to? What advice would you give to junior or someone, a student for that matter, trying to get into the industry as a lighting artist? This is a two-sided question because there's another question afterwards. But what is your advice based on the fact that someone wants to get into this industry? What should they do? What's the top three things you would want to do to make it easier for you? Um, if you were to do it again, although it seems like you were happy with your choices, obviously.
yeah. I mean, I would recommend you know, 10 years in live action before you move into visual effects. But I mean, if you got the time, go for it. um, I I would definitely say, yeah, absolutely. Get into photography. Get into like figure out how light works. That's what I always say to people is like, um, everything that you create is something that you've seen before, and that you've not only seen before that, but that you've reacted to. And there's things that you experience in your life and that you've seen that you just feel so strongly for, and that's what you reproduce, whether you try not to or try to. It's always going to come out. So I mean, it's such a preachy thing to say, but just feel and emote and see what triggers certain emotions in you, and that's what you create.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say like photography is incredible for that, because you can see how a lens works. You can see how a camera interprets light, and what kind of range you have in f-stops and exposure. Like what actually, like, how much black, because a lot of notes you get in CG is like, oh, like, I can't see that tiny little box over there. It has to come up. Well, in a real camera, you wouldn't see it. Okay, like that's something that you have to realize, and a lot of even supervisors don't understand that like you can't see everything, and that's what gives it away, the illusion of CG, that you like everything's visible all the time, and you're gonna have like a crazy sunshine, and you can also have the detail on somebody's face. You can't. Like that's
So
you
how do
look
you
at
deal
real
with
stuff.
that? Let's say
You
you get
try and
the
find a balance.
you get that your supervisor or your director goes, hey, this is too dark over there, and then because we have the same issue when we do for games as well, like
Yeah.
not even CG animation for games, just inside the game as well, is to explain the fact that that's not how it actually works. Not even, I mean, naturally our eyes can see a lot more than the camera, more stops, so naturally we can fill in a lot of the gaps if you look around, obviously, but the camera itself, so that's an issue I have, I guess. Let's speak for myself at least, is I know the eye can see a lot more, and then the camera cannot see a lot. Do I base my lighting on the eye, or the fact that the camera, because a lot of people keep saying learn from the camera, but the issue I have with learning with the camera, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm saying, but that's not how our eye actually works. Like, we can see a lot more detail. So should I trust the photoshopped the images that people do from a realistic point of view, or should I just go out during a sunset in the morning, get a fresh view, and then right afterwards go and do the lighting afterwards? Or should I look at images? Because there's I don't think people talk a lot about the fact that it's not the same thing. It's still not the same thing. Your eye and the camera and what you can actually do in an engine or software. It's not. It's two different things. How do you deal with that, especially when you have this conversation with someone who doesn't understand that?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. And I think you touched on something that I'll come back on, is this photoshopped age where like there isn't any real images left anymore, that nobody knows what a real camera can photograph anymore, which is a really scary thought. But then if I think of what I grew up on, which is like 35 mil film, this sort of cinematic look that people are adding filters to kind of achieve now with digital, is like I that's what I emote. Like that's what triggers me, is like things like, looking at ET or Close Encounters, or those sort of like cinematic experiences for me as a kid. That's what triggers my emotional output. Like that's what triggers my creative look. Um, and of course, I'm seeing stuff all the time that like inspires me and triggers emotion. And that feeds into my work as well. But yeah, it is tough to sort of like deal with the disconnect. What what do you do? I mean, like I usually just add a little bit of fill, and they final it, and then they take it down in comp, and that's the end of the conversation. But what you need to think about is like, yes, can you see that little box? Maybe, but what you need to be able to say is like, as a lighter, you say, well, the story is over here. And that's a very important thing that I've taken from live action, is I say, well, okay, that's great that you were missing this effect that we spent months on, but this is where people should be looking, and that's what you need to understand as a lighter, is like, where's the story, where's the focus? And this is a gift that we've been given as lighting artists, is like, we can control where the eye goes, and that's something you do on set all the time. It's like you're always moving the story around the image, and you're composing based on, you can use the focus of the lens, you can use like the composition of the characters, you can use a whole bunch of different tools. But when you're just using lighting, you say, well, this is the focus, like, and it might be the brightest part of the image, but it also might be the darkest. And if that's where you're looking, like you look at your face, like your face is the darkest part of the image, but I'm not going to look anywhere else because there's nothing else to look at.
It's nothing else.
Whereas in this room, like for some reason that, this light switch is brighter, that
Yeah.
that should be taken out in post, like there's no focus in my image, but in yours, like I'm here. So that's what you always have to think about. It's like, where is the image? Where is the focus? And also, what's the mood? Like, why is there a shadow on his face? Why is there not a shadow on his face? Why is there a shadow on half his face? Like why do we see just the mouth? Why do we see just the eye? Why do we see just a finger? Because that's the story. and that's always what you come back to. Like, what is the character going through, and what do I need to convey? And I remember one of my favorite cinematographers, John Seal. I always remember he once did a talk, and he said, every time I look at a shot, I say, how am I emotionally affecting the audience? And that's all you have to keep in the back of your mind. You open up a shot and say, how am I emotionally affecting the audience? And from there, you just take it. And you say, well, if I know that, every decision that I make comes back to that. And that's the most important part of filmmaking.
So when you do your work and your lighting, do you normally, because it's a common advice I've heard so far, and I'm not picking any advice. I don't go like this is the right advice or this is the bad advice or whatever. But the common nominator is light realistically and then change it according to what you need. How's your approach? Do you normally go through the process where you try and make it realistic or correct, so to speak, I guess, and then you do some tweaks, or would you just go straight and go, okay, I want a bit different color that's not really realistic, but it fits the story, it fits the mood? How's your thought process? Because I think a lot of people, as well, that I mentor, and as well as myself as well, I think a lot of us don't necessarily learn about the thought process behind things. We learn very quickly about the technical stuff, but not artistic, not creative, especially the mindset. Like, what are you thinking? How are you making your decision process, as you talked about? So what's your decision process and mindset when you are going through a specific piece? For example, the one we're going to look at in a few minutes. Is it very specific every time, or is it, how is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good advice. I mean, to an extent. I mean, you like for Lion King, that was our brief, was to make it look real from the beginning. I mean, it sort of changed as it went along, but we were given reference from like Planet Earth and documentaries that had really shot in Serengeti, and they were very sort of like specific about that look of Africa. And so, like, yeah, that was the idea, was like, make it real and then push it a little bit further. But in terms of, yeah, what I think about when I go and I think about how I would light it on a real set. So it's not really real. It's still, I'll open up people's scenes sometimes and I'll see like 100 lights like all over the place, just to sculpt things. And I can go through and I can be like, okay, well, that was because somebody said this part of the face was too dark, and this is because somebody said this, and this is because somebody said this was too dark. And I hate that, because it's like, and it's a very easy rhythm to get into, because people are going to constantly give notes and be like, oh, this is wrong. But what you need to do when you get notes like that is think about, okay, well, what are they really asking? Right? If they say, well, this part of the face is too dark, what they're really saying is like, I don't feel this emotion. I don't feel this is really working for this shot because of this reason. And you need to be able to interpret that. That's why I say, like, learn photography, learn filmmaking, learn any kind of like storytelling is going to help you with lighting. And yeah, so I'd say, like, I try to I start with 3 lights, and usually I end up with 3 lights. Like, this is sort of, I've done like seriously close sculpted like creature shots that I just use 3 lights, and it's fine. Like, that's how you would light it on set. Like, you wouldn't have like 100,000 like key lights and ring lights and like everything, just the perfect exposure and everything, because it doesn't look real anymore. And that's the problem, is like, the more you change it and the more you take it away from how you could really shoot it or how it would really be in real life, the less it looks real. And the less anything looks real, the less you connect to it, because you don't see that in your life. You might be able to see an image and feel emotional about it, but it's only because you can connect it to something in your real vision, in your real life, in your real memory. And that's why I talk about this sort of Photoshop idea, that everything's so perfect. And that's what they talk about now, is like, people are so obsessed with this perfection that they're so insecure about like not presenting something perfect anymore. And it's like, how do you connect with something so perfect? Because nothing in life is perfect. nothing.
And rim lights. People are obsessed with rim lights and
People are
everything.
obsessed with.
Like it's like every feedback. Even I do it at this stage. It's like, oh, you could add a rim light, but do you really need a rim light? Does it really serve the purpose? Except, I mean, a lot of the advice you get, especially when I had some mentors, and I always have mentors. I'd always look for new mentors. Doesn't really matter how experienced I'm getting. It. I think it's always good to have someone who is more experienced or have a different thought process. But it's like very common advice or feedback is like add this or rule of third. It's very systematic feedback people generally give. It's like the same thing that once a person learns the rule of third, rim light, back separating background, it's like a typical feedback you would give when you look at a piece. uh, what are your opinion about the process of feedback and the type of feedback and the quality of feedback? Because when you get these type of feedback such as rim light, rule of third, it is very systematic. I had a colleague who was an art teacher. He did painting, and he threw out all of these systematic, organized way of thinking about art. He was more about being creative, more about free fluid, more about approaching it from an emotional standpoint, and not saying that if you don't do rule of third, it's wrong. If you don't add a rim light, it's wrong. He was totally against this um, commercial way of thinking. Is how he thought. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, on
I
a
know it's
personal
difficult
level,
questions.
I absolutely agree, but at the same time, like I wouldn't be able to work for Marvel and Disney and not add rim lights to everything. Like this is what they want, and I guess that's part of the job is like after years of experience, you know straight away like what they want, and I think that's kind of like for me, it's a false sense of like my own creative input because I don't get a lot of notes because I already know what they want. um, right, but then it's like, but then am I really presenting my own vision? You know, am I? But then it's like, well, whose vision is it? It's not mine. It's the director's vision, or it's the most cases it's the production company's vision. So like, you just gotta make it look as good as you can, and hope that you're doing work for somebody who believes in storytelling. Um,
So you're doing a lot of feedback. Is that because you're a lead and they expect you to know everything, or how does that work?
it's because I'm so good. No, I mean, like,
I
yeah,
mean,
I
sure,
guess.
you're good, but
No, I'm not. I'm not. I mean, like, I sometimes I see my work and I give myself feedback and I'm like, that's not good enough. Like that's doesn't look good. And sometimes it'll get approved and I'll be like,
that's
don't
good.
approve that. Please
Why
don't.
did you approve that? What's wrong with you? This is shit.
Exactly. And I'll look back and I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna fix that. Sorry.
Are you
Sorry
ever
everyone.
at this? Are you ever at the stage where you're like doing something and you know it's not the best you can do, but you just want to move on and you just want to finish it? Do you ever reach the stage where you're like, oh, thank God he or she approved it, even though I know it's kind of not the best? Do you ever do that? Or because I admit sometimes I'm like, if it's not an important shot or if it's like not the key shot or the hero shot, I might be like, yeah, let's just move on to more important things.
Yeah, man.
Um,
I mean, I'm sort of famous for not working weekends. Like I said, I mean, when I was at Luma, I did enough weekends. So I after I moved to London, I said like, that's it. I'm not doing it anymore. So I've rarely done a Saturday. I've never done a Sunday. But I sort of like, if they ask me to work weekend, I say like, I've been doing this for so long. There's no reason for me to work a weekend because like if it hasn't been done in the time allotted by me, then it can't be done. You know what I mean? Like I know I could work all weekend and do it, but all that's gonna happen is it's just gonna be me sitting
website.
on. Yeah, like I'm gonna be sitting here on Saturday and I'm gonna do some circular notes, and then on Monday it's gonna change again. So
Yeah,
there's no point in me doing it. So yeah, like there's a
yeah,
point where I have had enough of the shot. It's 6 o'clock on a Friday, and that's the end. It goes on the
yes.
farm.
Schedule
Monday,
it.
yeah, on Monday I do it and I fix it up, or I present it as it is. And I guess like my background in compositing as well, I can go in and I can make it look pretty, even if the renders aren't amazing, you know. So
Yeah.
you know, that's sort of like a superpower that I like to keep in the back pocket.
Sadly, we can't do that in games.
Yeah.
You gotta make it good the first time because there's
Yeah.
no cheating once you do it.
Which I love. I would love, honestly, like you know, like that's something that I object to a lot is the fix it and comp mentality, and it's very rampant in film because it's just the way that we've always done it. But I would, you know, like definitely on Lion King, like the CG was really beautiful. Like the assets were so nice. The environments and everything was done so beautifully that like it was a pleasure to light those because like you'd get a render, even your quarter res like noisy render that you look at in your viewers is still really pretty. And it was just such a pleasure. Like you just like you really could focus on lighting and just be like, well, I can make this better. And that's the beauty of this kind of work is like you're not making something ugly look better, you're making something beautiful look even better, and you can focus on the emotion, you can focus on the story then. And that was a real treat for me because you know usually it's not like that.
I
So
mean,
yeah.
how long do you, when you work on a piece, do you ever take a break or switch the piece like to another shot? Because there's something I call like color blindness or lighting blindness. Is the more you work on a piece, the more it can get worse because you're not noticing. You're trying to fix stuff that looks great, or there's no problem with it, but you're like looking at it from a different eye. Do you ever experience that, and what do you do when that happens?
I'm constantly on everything. Like I don't sit and labor over a single detail. I think that I know that that's going to come. So basically, what I usually do and that's why they sort of tend to leave me on either a smaller project or a whole sequence, is that I'll just do the whole thing. And that's again, that's my live action background is like I need to know how it cuts. I need to know how it feels together. It's not just a single shot on its own. Sometimes it is, like sometimes it's like a big space ship flying through an asteroid or whatever, right? That's one shot alone. That's fine. You can labor on that. But if it's a sequence like say this of Simba and Scar fighting on a cliff, you know, I did that whole sequence like sort of like together so that I could see how it sort of lights together, and I really like keeping the same setup for most shots.
You
So
wanna should I add this at the stream the screen, or we can start talking about it a little bit so we have enough time
yeah,
for that
sure.
as well?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I guess actually I'll talk about this one briefly. Maybe I'll just let it run, but so this was a new sequence for the new film that we called Nala Escapes, and basically, yeah, I guess it wasn't in the original, and they wanted a scene where Nala sneaks out and escapes from Scar's eyes. And basically, when I came on, they didn't really know how to do it because, like, you know, the brief, as I said, was for a realistic lighting. So I tried to look for reference of anything in the jungle, of like lions in the jungle, lions in the desert, at night. And everything in a documentary is either night vision or it's got like massive, you know, floodlights from the cars or whatever. And then, you know, you look at people reference and maybe you can find somebody who's sort of lit it quite dark. And it was really hard to find anything naturalistic, and that's what they wanted. So I sort of went back and forth, and then we did a bunch of tests on moonlight, and we said like, well, what's moonlight? Because in the Hollywood, it's you know, Aladdin, it's this blue shiny light, right? And I think like in the end we sort of landed on something slightly blue, and we sort of went back and forth on what that color was. And I thought back to myself, and I remembered my uncle's farm. Ironically, when I was a kid, I would be like walking through the farm at night, and on a full moon night, I remembered what it looked like, and I remembered what I could see. And I mean, your memory is obviously not the most reliable thing, but in my head, I'd be like, well, I could see sort of like highlights in the trees. I could see very soft shadows, you know, like you can definitely make out that there's shadow and there's light. And that's what I tried to recreate with this was like the idea that it is moonlight and it's dark, but you still see the highlights. You still see the emotion and the detail in the environment and the faces. And so that's sort of what we were going for. And you see, like, I mean, it looks very dark on YouTube, but this is a really tough sell, like to go this low in a Hollywood film. Just be like, how much black can you really get away with? And I think they took it down even more in comp. Like in the end, like it sort of like ended up halfway between. So where I started was very dark, and then I sort of like pushed a little bit more of the key from the moon, and then we sort of like in comp they sort of pushed down a little bit more of the shadows. Once we added the LUT, like from the client, it crushed a lot of the values as well. So that's what happens, is like that's why they ask for a lot more detail in CG, is because once it goes through the grade, you're going to lose a lot of those blacks anyway.
So when you do this lighting, you are overexposing, so to speak.
In the end,
so to underexpose later, or what's the process?
So yes, so in the end, I did render 2 stops up. So yes, we rendered it overexposed, but then in my comp slap script, I had a node to grade it down straight away, so that no one ever saw the overexposed renders. But just to get rid of the noise, we rendered it overexposed, because obviously the indirect light and black levels is where you get a lot of the noise in CG renders. So you want to try and avoid that. That's why they always want to fill everything up, but not at the expense of the emotion or the feeling of the scene. And it's remarkable how much, like, if I push this moon another stop, it's not moonlight anymore. And if I pushed it like with maybe like 0.2 red, it's not moonlight anymore, so it was a very fine balance to try and get that right.
So how do you, what's your thought about because is it one directional light, or is it multiple light? It's impossible to really know.
Yeah, so basically I had a setup where we that's another thing, is like trying to find an HDR or like an image for a dome to give like an ambient fill at nighttime is really difficult. So we had some some HDRs that they'd shot at the Joshua Tree in California, where you can go out in the desert and it's a very flat environment. Obviously there's some cactus or whatever, but even then, like, the camera's not gonna give you what night looks like. And that's what's really tricky, is like, as soon as you ask a digital camera to expose up a night sky, it's gonna add the color and the filtration of it. And basically, like, they say that the moon is actually neutral, and it's more neutral than obviously the sun. So how does that blue come in? Does it come through the sky and does it filter? Do you ever actually see blue at night? I've never been walking at night in the streets and seen blue.
From my understanding, it's a Hollywood thing, right? The blue.
Yeah.
From a scientific point of view, I learned that last year. That from a science point of view, when they measure it, it's green or red actually.
Right.
Or something weird. I don't remember the details, but I agree with you. As a human, when I go outside, I don't see this kind of lighting necessarily when I'm outside, because not that I'm outside a lot at the late night to really remember either, though I normally sleep during night. But how do you approach this type of lighting and kind of what you're talking about, the color and the tone? I mean, because it sells. I mean, we know it's night, but at the same time, when you go outside as a person, you wouldn't see a bird this well lit. I'm assuming there's some extra light on it.
Yeah. So ironically, we were sent a short film that somebody made with a high speed camera that basically was shot with no lights at night, and it was these 3 characters sort of like climbing in hiking in a valley or something. And you look at it and it's like, okay, well, I believe it's at night, but it doesn't look like night. It looks like it's shot in the afternoon, because the camera's going to expose the sky up. So that's what happens, is like this dark night sky is suddenly a white sky,
Right.
and this moonlight that hardly hits, that your eye can sort of see, is suddenly like a really harsh, like hot rim light, and it's like, well, that's not how moonlight looks, even though it's actually moonlight actually shot on a camera, right? So that's what you have to find, is like, what's the balance between what it would actually look like at night and what a camera would actually see. And that's why we went around a lot of circles, like trying to find that thing. Eventually, I think the big step forward for me was I got some reference from Sicario, and there's a scene in Sicario that Roger Deakins shot that is like almost black, like it's
Night lighting is pretty hard though, isn't it? I think a lot of people ask about it as well, generally speaking. How do you light a dark scene? How do you make it believable and visible? Which is a big deal in games, because in games you want to see everything normally.
yeah.
Yeah, look at that.
So
This
yeah,
looks
like
like night, I
yeah, well,
guess.
that's the thing. But then it's not night; it's the sunset. So there's a scene just before this. Actually, I won't search for it now. But like, basically, they have a dialogue scene between Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro, and it's very, very subtle light. Like it's almost imperceptible how little light there is. And I presented that, and I said, look, this is it. Like this, this is a Hollywood film, and they got away with it. And we sort of started at that point, and then it was like, oh, okay, we need a little, like, it's still a kids film. It's still Lion King, it's still full CG, so we need to see a little bit more. So we sort of went up and down in the values, and like I said, there was a point where it breaks. There's a point where it's like, that's too much. That doesn't look like night. It doesn't look like moon anymore. And I was lucky, I had a really good comp lead on this scene as well, and we went back and forth, like trying to find what that color was and what that value was, and what the VFX soup wanted. So yeah, I was really proud of this scene in the end. I mean, it was a real struggle. Like it took a while to get into the rhythm of it. Once we had the look, we rendered it all in about a week. Like every shot was from like influx creatively to just like, okay, it's done.
So was it like one light and HDR, or did you use any
Right, sorry.
extra light?
Yeah, so sorry, yeah. So basically I took this Joshua Tree HDR, and I had to recreate parts of the sky. There was too much. So basically, like when you shoot the sky, like the sun is still bleeding from the horizon. So if you have that in a dome, you're going to get a lot more light sort of coming up from below, which ruins the illusion of this ambient light coming from the top. So I had to sort of paint that out of my HDI so that it was a bit more even as a dome, but then keep the stars, because they they sort of wanted this idea of reflections of stars. And then I created a sky in my slaps as well that had stars. And once again, like, you wouldn't see stars if it was this dark. So it's very hard to find a balance of, like, if you were seeing a lion close up and you could see their face, there's no way you would see stars in the sky. Like, the camera can't do that kind of range.
Tell that to my cinematic team who wants to see stars in some of the shots.
Exactly. I mean, it's a classic note. Everybody wants to see stars in the sky. Like, you can't just present a black sky image for some reason. So yeah. But that's once again, that's the compromise that you make. And again, like, we had to sort of like, find that balance of where it is. There is another sequence that I sort of like finished off, where it's Simba and Mufasa talking at sunset, and it sort of progresses into night, and there are sort of twinkly stars, but that's part of the story. Like, we sort of need to see the stars and that sort of thing. So that one's a little bit more fantastical, but I think this one was more a realistic kind of.
So when do we comfortably say this isn't scientifically or realistic in terms of human eye, and then say, well, you can get away with it when you use cameras or photography? And when do you say, okay, let's do this because it works, but it isn't correct scientifically or realistically, but it sells the illusion, as you say? When do we make that decision, and how do you comfortably make that stand also as a creative individual who might be responsible for it as well? Like, there is some challenge to it, because there's always different people, different opinion, and then there is a lot of information out there that contradicts your decision as well. So how do you approach that?
To be honest, like, when do you make
You
that
say,
decision? You run out of money and you run out of time, and that's the end. And you make a decision. I mean, you literally like. I don't think I've worked on a single project where we've got to the end and be like, well, that's it. It looks perfect, because it
yeah,
doesn't. Nothing ever looks perfect. And when I saw Lion King, as proud of as I am of the work, it's probably about 10% of what we could have done. I think, like, in all areas, and that's not to say, you know anything bad about anybody. It's just that's the way it goes. You get in this sort of committee mind, or you get into this idea of like, um, changing things and fixing things, and it just gets away. Like I said, these assets were beautiful, and everyone put in so much beautiful work that to an extent it is a game changer, but I think it could have been like, it could have progressed us 10 years into the future. The
mm,
potential that we had, with what we had. But yeah, I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's always the way it is. Like every show, like Doctor Strange, the same as well. I think like Doctor Strange was like, we did the Doctor Dimension part at the end, and that was a very fantastical sort of like big world building kind of exercise. Um, but in the end, I don't think it was. Yeah, like once again, it wasn't even 10% of what it could have been. Like it could have been
mm.
so mind-blowingly beautiful and incredible. And
So the biggest challenge you had in this shot was figuring out the nighttime, the color, the mood, and still have the emotional impact. Um, um,
yeah, yeah, I'd say that. It's like, like it's a very dark. This film was a lot darker than the original, I think, in a lot of ways. And I don't mean like just.
no one said that it's too dark, too current, too many areas. That's like not
I'm sure
bright
they
enough.
did. I'm sure somebody said that. Like, honestly, do you know what? You know what it was? To answer your question, was like, when when did we decide it was okay? Basically, we were in a vacuum, like going around in circles, and I would present it every day, and supervisors would be like, yeah, maybe we do this, maybe we do that. And one of the guys on another sequence, he looked at one of the shots and he said, I think that's beautiful. And that was it. And we all sat in the room and we're like, oh, okay, well, I guess we did it.
Yeah, if
And
one person likes it, then more people will like it.
well, yeah, I mean, and you need those fresh eyes, like you really do. It's really hard to decide when something's done, because you it's not. Nothing's ever done. Nothing's ever finished. Like, ask any artist who's ever painted a picture or created anything. There's no way they're gonna finish it and be like, that's as good as it's ever gonna get. I've
Mm.
perfected this one thing that I've created from my heart, because you can't. There's no way you can reproduce what you really feel in your heart. You can get as close as you can, and you can hope that other people feel that connection as well.
So, are you moving the moonlight left and right in different shots?
So I tried to maintain it. So basically, sorry, I still haven't answered your question, but I had two other domes. So I had one dome where I'd painted a sharp moon texture that had a soft fall off, and then another one with an even softer one. So it's a very broad sphere, I guess, on a dome. So basically, I could go between, and I go those on separate multi-lights or AOVs, so that the compa could control, like, if a light was a little bit too harsh on the shadow, we could go to that softer one. If it was too soft, we could go to that harder one. But most of the time, I don't think they really played around with it. I sort of we would do that in lighting and just sort of adjust the values, and decide which shot needed more of the sharpness, which one needed more of the soft fill across the face. And often it was like dependent on the character. Scar, he reacts very well to a harsh light because he has a lot of detail. He has a lot of surface detail. He has a lot of fur that's very interesting in his face. Whereas someone like Nala, she her character design was a lot more different to what a human face is. Like, she's got a very long snout, which a lioness does, and even the eye sockets were very different. Like, they sort of like, where's the shot of Nala? They're sort of like, I guess you can't really see it here, but the eyebrows are sort of like blocking any of the light that hits the eyes. So that was a big thing because she can't look scary. So like, you're using the same lighting setup for a scary character and a hero character, and you know that's where you start to play with the emotion. It's like, well, it should be it should be scary for her, not scary to be her, right? So that's what you want. Is like it's a scary environment that she's in, but she still looks innocent. And that was the whole idea. So what do? That's what I'm talking about. Like it's not so much of the harsh shadow moonlight. We started using more of the soft one. So the soft one sort of like spreads across her face, and you can lift a little bit of the dome. You can fill in a little bit of the shadows on her. Zazu, the bird, was a whole different story. It was a really hard character to make look good, because it's once again, it's a crazy face. Like it's a massive beak, and
So
the
how does that
eyes.
work when different characters react to the same light? Are you then adjusting the character, the materials, or is there another, or is it compositing that does the work then?
I usually, yeah, like I mean, usually you'd run out of time, and in comp they just sort of have to lift the grade and do different bits like to fill in the shadows. They'd probably ask you for additional fill, and that's where you get into this circular motion of like, add more light here, so that they can take it away. On this sequence though, I was doing fairly detailed comps on it, even just with lighting slaps, because we were presenting these lighting slaps to the client, which is quite rare. Usually, like especially on live action films, you wouldn't really show the lighting. Like you'd probably show something that's at least a temp comp before it goes to the client. In this case, like we were going straight to client as lighting slaps, and they were being approved because it's a full CG show. Like you should be able to light it. You shouldn't really have to do a lot of compositing because the whole world is there, right? So yeah, like I was already playing with values and trying to get that emotion right in the lighting slaps rather than waiting until it gets composited. So yeah, like to answer your question, like how do you deal with the different characters? It was mostly just rotating the dome, like mostly rotating like exactly that moment where the light hits, and it was very specific as to how it would affect the face. And that was so important on this show, to have the animation locked and not changing, because the light was very specific to their poses, which is what you would do in live action. You would have the actor blocked in, you'd have them stand on their mark, and if they hit their mark, they stand in the right light. Whereas in CG, like it can change all the time, like they can just be like, oh well, now the shot is here, now the animator's like, and the animation's going here and here and here. And it's like, well, I did really specific lighting for that shot. So going back to before, like that's why I try to keep it broad and keep it to very simple lighting, because if it changes, you don't want to lose everything and have to start again, because they won't let you. They'll just be like, do the same
Yeah.
thing you did before with a new animation.
It's so different though compared to like when you do games, especially in-game content. It's so different than cinematic movies and CG. There's no room for any of these. Normally, there's no room for this
Yeah.
trick because the player can look up and see the sky rotate. The player can
Right.
look around anywhere and jump around wherever they want, and you can't just switch too much. Or there's no, obviously there are events and level design things you can do to do make changes, obviously, but there's definitely different workflow, different way. Especially when I do the lighting, when I look at references, I did like the Joker subway lighting, which is just a still shot and a video using the real reference. But when I do it and I try and learn from it, I don't necessarily look at the original image all the time that's ungraded. I try and light it knowing that it's graded, but I don't want to do the grading myself afterwards. So I try and achieve the same look using the actual light. So I pick the color that is normally done in grading, and I kind of do everything with as few light as possible with the same color on the light, while the original might have like a more whitish or some other color. I will add the grading color onto the light instead of depending on post production type of techniques, which you can do inside engine, but that would be still one time thing, though it's not like ever changing. So it's definitely different and interesting. Do you have time to go through the code stuff as well, or are you in a hurry?
Yeah, man. No, I'm happy. Yeah, I can keep going.
Yeah, let's go through the cloud stuff as well, because
Sure.
that's an interesting topic. Not a lot of people would be like, cloud what?
What's a cloud? Yeah, sure. No, that's interesting about the games and the grades. I think like
Yeah,
I think that's a great way to work. I'd guess like
it's
in
less
films.
forgiving, I would
Yeah,
say, for
yeah.
games. It's like you really need to understand. I'm not saying, I'm definitely not saying that people in CG and cinema don't understand light. I would say they understand light better than someone like me who goes straight into games. So I would probably have to spend time doing photography and other stuff to really improve myself even more. But I would say, well, you need to be more thorough and correct the first time you do the lighting in games, because there's nothing you can do afterwards. It's what you do is what you get. Basically, there's no tweaking. There's no going into nuke and tweaking the image. That's never gonna happen. Maybe in the future they might, I mean, Unreal Engine, Unity Engine, they might develop something that allows us to do it.
Hmm.
There are ways to do it. When the player moves from like a box of volume to another box of volume, you can change the color and the grading if you wanted to, of course. But it's not the same. I mean, because it needs to sell the whole world
Mm.
according to the players' movement. And I'm not talking about the current games I'm working on now, which is very emotional, narrative type of games I'm working on right now. But the other type of games where you run around and you're walking around, you're running around, shooting or driving, whatever. There's no let's move the light for this particular corner of the map, or
Exactly. Yeah.
that's maybe someone has done it and I haven't noticed. It would be interesting to know if someone has pulled it off and I haven't noticed. But there are games where you have real-time lighting, meaning you can shoot the light as well, right? So that's a different
Mm.
thing as well. You can shoot all the lights in Hitman 3. Okay, how do you make the base lighting once there are no lights? And then they use cinematic techniques that are overexposing just so you can see everything. And that's
Yeah.
also an interesting thing. So yeah, it's definitely a very, it's interesting to listen to you and other people as well, obviously. The different mindset and approaches. You can use a lot of the principles, but we do use Davinci Resolve for like portfolio pieces. Like if we want to edit something, a
Mhm.
lot of people I know they'll use Davinci Resolve to do the color grading for the final piece, because it's just much better than using the in-engine editing, basically. So people do that as well, and then if they make a video like for their portfolio, they'll use DaVinci Resolve. They do the editing, and people will use Nuke as well when they use that kind of presentation, and that's useful for people as well to know all of this. But when it comes to actual game production, there's no Nuke to help me. There's no After Effects to help me. There's just do it correctly, learn how to do it, which is
Yeah.
not easy to do at all, I would say. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? The differences?
Absolutely. I think that like we lean too much on grades. We lean too much on post changes. And when that's what I was talking about before about like, you go on Instagram and it's very hard to find an unedited picture. But that's just
I don't
society.
edit my pictures normally. A lot of my pictures, see, I don't have a strong viewpoint on it, but when I try and do my stuff, even when I do photography, I'm trying very hard to do it without any grading. I want to see how well can I take a photo without, it's not gonna look good. That's the issue though, when you don't do it, because people are so used to cinema now, like blue moonlight, which
Hmm.
isn't really blue. People are so programmed uh, the visual language of cinema that they get so used to seeing it now that if you don't do it, it's not as good anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a problem. I think people don't appreciate the. I think people don't appreciate the genuine beauty that we do see normally, without all the photoshopping, without all the editing
Yeah.
and stuff. My art director luckily agrees with me, so he's also a very avid believer that you got to try and put it up without post effect, without post grading. Do your best, find out how to do it as little as possible, because in games people can also turn it off. There are
Mm.
sometimes settings in the game for optimization reason, and then what you do, it looks terrible. And I'm not gonna mention the game because I have interviewed the person already. But there's a game, and if you turn off the post process, the game it doesn't look good.
Right.
because it's all on post process. So if you as a player turn it off, it just looks flat. So that's why I have a different approach to lighting. Is I'm not trying to impress based on the final look using post process, using grading too much. I will do it to practice because it helps me understand lighting and color when I'm making the changes afterwards. I can like see it easier. I can see the graphs in DaVinci. I can understand it a bit quicker to teach my eye what to look for, basically. But that's my point of view anyway on that. Do you do any portfolio pieces, private pieces, or are you just busy with your work and you just do the work and that's it?
I do quite a lot of stuff in my spare time, but I don't do a lot of CG.
Is it photography?
Yeah, photography. I actually, I'm actually directing a TV series next year, which is super weird. Like it's been a long time, but yeah. I mean, I'll shoot stuff for people sometimes, or
Don't want to tell us,
do
or
it.
you don't want to tell us which TV series? It's too early.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll watch this space. Yeah, but yeah. I mean, I try anything. Like I love being a bit more diverse. I as I said, I didn't come from a computer background. I don't necessarily like spending my spare time like doing this kind of stuff. Like I definitely like when I started using Houdini, I had a period where I just got into that in a big way, like just being like, this is so cool, like I can do the craziest stuff. But I mean, I'm not sort of like that kind of guy that will just like play around and experiment with different tools and things like that. As I said earlier, like I just want the result. Like I sort of know what I want, and I get sort of bogged down because it's like, oh man, I have to learn all this, and then I have to learn this and this and this
Yeah,
before
it's a
I
lot
get
to
that thing.
learn.
Yeah. So
It's a
like
lot for you guys as well, actually, because you guys have to learn 3D software, lighting. Then, as you mentioned in your track record, compositing. That's a lot. Like I can get away with just one tool if I pick the right company, if I pick
right,
the right project. I don't necessarily need to. It doesn't help me though, of course, in the long run if I don't pick up other stuff. But it
right.
does make my life easier to learn other stuff. Like painting is something I'm learning on the side instead to help me with creative thinking in terms of color
Hmm.
and mood. That I think is different for painting than it is for photography. Um, uh, but in terms of that as well, so you do photography and you're doing a TV show later. Is this on top of the work? Are you doing like? Are you leaving? Taking? Is it because you? My impression is you do a lot of per project. It's a full time position you normally have, I
Hmm.
believe, but some of them are contract based as well.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Like I've had people say in interviews the last year, like, "Oh, you seem to change around." Like, well, it's not by choice. I mean, when COVID hit, it wasn't great to be to be on a short contract because like they were the people that were put on furlough or let go because like they had a lot of the big studios they had to let go of most of their staff and
Mm.
not mentioning names, but I was a company that just hired up quite a lot before the lockdown, and all of a sudden, no films were coming out and nothing was shooting, so there wasn't any work. So they had like the most people they'd ever had, and suddenly like the least work they'd ever had. So that's just the way it goes. I
Actually,
was,
that's
sorry.
true. Sorry, that's true. Some of our team members they come from the movie industry, but some are leaving as well because now movies are coming back.
Yep.
Uh, so
It's
hey,
really busy. Yeah, it's the opposite. Like, if you look at March last year, it was probably the greatest time in a long time. Like probably since when I started in 20, I guess in 2012 when Fuel closed down,
yeah.
and Rhythm and Hues, like a lot of studios ran out of work then, and it's been booming ever since. And then all of a sudden last year, there wasn't enough work for everyone, and now it's just like all of that work is coming at once, and they're just
Mm.
shooting like crazy. Like everybody's making stuff, and now that they know that people are going to stream forever, they're just pumping out shows, and it's a great time to be an artist for sure if you're working on TV and film.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, that's going to be around for a long time, I think. And have you ever considered going into games with your expertise and learn how to do it in a different way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been approached by a couple of companies, and I had a friend that I worked with a few times, and she went to work for Naughty Dog on Last of Us 2. And for sure, like when I played that game, I was like, God, I would love to work on this. It's such a beautiful game. And like I've haven't heard she can't talk a lot about her experience, but they sound like such really lovely people and a
Well,
really
I
nice
can
company.
talk about it,
Oh
and
yeah?
rumor has it that it's quite a hardcore company. You really
Oh
have
yeah?
to
It's a bit
do
rough?
the stuff you talked about in the beginning of the that you have to work weekends and stuff. It's
Okay,
really,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
really that's to get that kind of qualitative game. You have to have people really working your ass off.
Mm, mm.
So that's what I've been told anyway from people that has left Naughty Dog. One of the key reasons was basically it's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a very good company if you're young and you don't have family. I think you
Yeah.
could pull it off. And that's with a lot of game companies. I think if you don't have a family and responsibility to that certain extent, there's certain companies you would pick at a certain age, and then the certain companies that are more suitable as older you get, like Ubisoft is not known for paying the best, I would say. Yes, this is my stream and I'm saying it. And but they are very good at the family stuff, the community stuff, the work
Okay, good.
environment
Mm.
stuff. So normally when people are older and they ask me, yeah, well, if you're old, you have kids, you want stability and safety, I would say Ubisoft is probably a good place to work. But if you
Mm.
want like money and recognition, you probably want to go to like a hardcore company and work your ass off there and then go somewhere else afterwards. Uh, I follow neither of these advices for myself, of course. Um, I have a third option for myself, which is I pick fresh companies, fresh titles, because I rather be one of the first person who worked on a unknown project that hopefully gets BAFTA awards and say I was on that
Yeah.
first project. Because I don't personally, I've learned about myself. I don't personally feel that saying I worked on a big title that has a franchise is not as interesting to me as I thought, as saying that I was the first one who was building this IP, was building this company. I feel is more rewarding as you get to make more decisions, you get to do more than you normally would on a big company, basically.
Mm.
So my approach is a bit different. It's more about picking the most difficult places, like moving to a country where there's lockdown and COVID is very high in London when I moved. COVID were very high in France when I moved, and both companies were the new companies. Like the one I joined in Ubisoft, that was a fresh company, it was just 2 years old. So, and Interior Nights, where I work now, is run by Caroline Marshall, which is the creative designer, I believe, for Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls or something like that. So very heavy narrative games, basically, and also one of the few companies that has almost 50-50 female and male ratio in terms of employment across the world
Mm.
industry, which is pretty impressive as well. So it's definitely interesting company. So that's how I pick it. But the other two I gave is for the people who want to do the other choices. I'm sure the other choices and strategies too. But um, what about you? Do you have that kind of thought process when you pick a project? Because I mean, you are obviously a very high profile projects, and I notice a lot of people are purposely picking high profile company, high profile games, because it has unfortunately a big impact in terms of your personal branding to do that. But what's your strategy behind that?
I mean, it's a personal thing for me. Like I was at Luminous. I mean, I was fairly happy for a while. I felt like I wasn't being challenged as much as I could have been. I sort of just got to a point where I was by my last year or so at Lumen, I was the director of photography, so I was in charge of like, I guess like camera overseeing and then moving into like creative lighting and doing pitches and things like that. So it was a great role, but I just felt like I didn't. I wanted to be around people who were much better than me that I wanted to like aspire to. And I thought if I came to some of the big studios that I would find those people who had like, you know, been around for a long time and they really, really knew this stuff. And I mean,
Did it work? Because
yeah.
guess this is a disadvantage for me. I've only been the only lighting artist in every studio I worked on. I have not had a
Okay.
on-site studio mentor or senior to help me, which I do believe is there is a disadvantage to it. The advantage is, of course, I have received promotion much quicker than anyone else because I'm the only one, so there's only one choice. But
That's
in
good
terms of
odds.
learning, it's different. Yeah, it's always a good odd in that sense. But I'm assuming it helped you though in terms of picking studios to learn from someone else.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've definitely met some incredibly talented people since I came to London. Probably not like the first show that I worked on. Yeah, for sure. That was Wonder Woman. I mean, there were some really talented people, but it was more of a machine at that point. Like I was sort of coming in pretty late. They'd done some pretty drastic changes on it, and we were sort of like trying to get it out. So I was more like an artist for hire on that, and then I sort of like rolled onto more important roles after that. Um, but yeah, like I mean, there's you know, I don't know how much. Yeah, I guess I can talk about. We I
Of course you can.
I mean, famously, I when I was at DNEG, I got this email and I was on another show and they said, "Oh, we want you to move on to Justice League," and I was like, you know, I'd heard about what was happening on Justice League, and they said, oh, "Okay, we've got this series of shots where we need to remove the mustache of Henry Cavill." Um, and I wrote back and I said, "Well, I have a mustache and a beard, so I think I'm perfectly qualified for this." So, you know, like that was kind of my job. And in defense, you know, like no one's ever said that ours look fake. You know, like a lot of different studios did those removals, and some of the shots are extremely weird. But I mean, like, you know, I honestly, you can't really blame the artist as well. It was a very strange show, and it was a lot of strange decisions being made on all levels. But anyways, not to get into details about it. What I learned from that was like we were a very small team just working on those beard shots. It was really just like it was mostly I think I did have another lighter at some point, but he had to go back on another show. But it was mostly me just lighting like all the shots in this cornfield. And then I had like a really talented asset guy, and a generalist who had done the rig and the textures and the face. And what people don't realize is we replaced like from here to here on close-ups of a very recognizable actor who is filmed like full face in cutting shots. So you're going back and forth between like an actual shaven face shot like a year before to a slightly different shaped, a slightly chubbier perspective done in CG. So like, you know, we had to sort of like we had a whole bunch of different stuff that we had to match. Like the lighting was done on a set compared to shots that were shot in an actual field. It was the live action lighting didn't quite match, so we were sort of going back and forth like, okay, we match that exactly what they did on the green screen, but then you have to composite it back into a real field and that sort of thing. But anyway,
You were
what I
doing
learned,
this in 2017, I think, right?
yeah. Well, I
And the
guess
only mustache
20,
character is Jason, isn't it? Balboa, the Aquaman, isn't that
no,
correct?
it was just it was just for Henry Cavill. So,
Oh, yeah,
so basically, yeah, he was on Mission Impossible, which I ended up working on as well. And
nice.
ironically, I had to put a bit on him for some reason. Anyways, he couldn't, you know, famously he couldn't shave to do the reshoots for Justice League, so we had to
Oh, yeah.
replace his face with a CG shaven face. But anyway, like
So he didn't expect that, did he? He was like, "Yeah, I'm done. Just gonna show my face finally." And then, sorry, you're not done. Come back.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was what was interesting about it was like, you know, just going into that kind of detail in a human face, and it's something that ironically you don't do that often, because a lot of that stuff is usually plate based. And if you're going really, really, sorry, if you're going really, really realistic on a close-up human face, like in a film, it's like you can count on your hand like how many times that's been done. I mean, like since then, I guess they did The Irishman, they did it in a different technique, but it's and I think like the work that they did on that film is really, really beautiful. It's like really, sometimes it's uncanny. Sometimes there's a few shots that maybe could have used a bit more work, but that's down to decisions. That's down to what the material is and how the textures work and all that sort of stuff. And that's what we went into a lot of detail and like, his, how much spec is there around the nose? How much spec is there, specifically on this part of his face, on this part of his face. And once you get into those details, like that opens up a whole new Pandora's box. You're not doing, you can get 99% of a CG character, and that 1% is going to ruin everything because people know what faces look like, and it's really, really hard to get that
Yeah,
right.
that's true.
So,
Can't
I
fake
mean,
that.
yeah, I don't think every shot of that mustache was 99%, but the stuff that we did, I think we did okay.
Yeah.
Especially for like, I think it was like 8 weeks or something. We did the
I
whole
think
thing.
I think it went well compared to I mean compared to Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars movies at the end, which was like completely bombarded, and then this guy comes online on he makes a video on YouTube and he got hired afterward because he made a
The
better
deep fake.
he made a better version basically.
Yeah.
Uh, then you
So
have
that's
it's
interesting.
definitely a lot of
Yeah.
work.
I think deepfake's an interesting one to talk about because like a lot, people made the same jokes about the mustache. Like somebody did a comparison of like, oh, this is the thing, but what you don't realize is like deepfake is based on footage or it's based on an animation. So you need to get the animation right. So if you're doing a full CG character, it's very hard to get the animation right, and that's often where it falls down. You see, Luke Skywalker in that last episode of Mandalorian. Um, I think that they made a conscious decision to subdue all of the animation, so he's very still, and that's what happens. Is like any movement that you really do in real life, an animator is going to try and reproduce that, but it's just for it to be recognizable, for it to be visual in what we're reviewing, it's going to be pushed to the max, and you're constantly going to spend your time pulling it all the way back. And it's the same with lighting, and it's the same with everything in CG. You can always like you recognize something and you see it straight away. Like it's like, oh, okay, well the sun is coming from here, and then when you reproduce it, it's too obvious. It's always too obvious because that's just what you're focusing on. When you look at an image, you don't focus on it straight away. Your eye has to be directed to it. So you have to find that subtlety, like it's not just making it obvious and blowing it out because that's what you automatically do because like when you focus on something, you highlight it. And you have to find that balance of not highlighting it as if it looks weird, but
Does
showing
it?
it.
Did you do the Luke Skywalker one
Oh no,
on Mandalore? No, because I remember you did Mandalorian as well. I was like, did
right.
I just talk about his stuff? Which is
No, no,
fine. It's
no.
not a problem if I did, but it's just
I
good
mean,
to know.
I'd love to do more digidouble stuff. It's really hard to kind of get. I mean, obviously, yeah, I've lit a lot of digidoubles and a lot of
Yeah, but this
human
was
characters,
the
but not to that
it,
extent.
it's interesting. It definitely because I obviously don't understand it too much because I don't. It's such a different field that I don't want to spend too much time. It's good to like watch the videos and breakdowns, but
Mm.
it's its own expertise to really dig into it. Like you have to do it because you're in that sphere a lot more. But then there was the Fast and Furious when was it Walker when he
Oh,
died or
okay.
something,
Mhm.
and then they used his brother, I believe, to do some of the sequences in the car at least, and that was pretty well done, I would
Mhm.
say,
Mhm.
believable. So are these things? Are you interested in these kind of things as well, basically, or have you ever done something similar?
Yeah, I mean that's probably the closest that we've done. I think like ILM does a. I think Weta has done some incredible work. I think like probably in the last few years, Thanos, the digital domain, and Weta did is probably the most impressive CG character
Mm.
I've seen. Um, but then you can go back to like Gollum was really incredible, and you think that was 20 years ago. It's insane, but it was good decisions. And that's the thing. It's like it's not always just the technology. We have the technology to do it. You can look on the internet, you can see full CG renders of humans. Like you can see like somebody's rendered a still that looks like a human, or they've rendered like a test of a rig or whatever, and maybe it's slightly off, but it's really close. But why isn't it in films? Why isn't it always perfect? Because of the decisions. And there's so much that goes into it. And it could be your source material, it could be the lip sync, it could be the animation, it could be like the finest little details. Like maybe there's not enough detail in the skin. Maybe there's, usually the model and the texturing is fine, and it looks real, but then once you animate it, it loses it, or once you light it, it loses it. Something's wrong. There's always something missing, and it's a decision that somebody's made that wasn't quite real, that doesn't have that emotion. And there were times where we looked at Henry's face on the screen, and the supervisor said, it looks real, it looks like it matches, but it doesn't look like him. It doesn't look like Henry. And it's so bizarre, because you can look at the images and you're like, well, it's almost exactly the same. But you're right, it's not him. And it could be the tiniest little thing, like just a little bit of his cheek is just, it's like, not even a millimeter off, and it's somebody else's face. And we are so familiar with faces that we can see that kind of detail. We can see
and movement as well. I think we've come a very long way. I was watching behind the scenes of Superman from 1978 with Christopher Reeve, and there's on YouTube. There's 2 parts or something, and I was watching part 2 just because I could, just all the miniatures they used and all the lighting they had to work on to get it to be believable with the thunder things going on, and they had a lot of challenges as well with the CG part. In that time when he was supposed to fly, so they tried CG, it didn't work well because the movement was not fluid enough, and they tried a lot of different things. But then they found out when Christopher Reeve came on set to do like with the cables and stuff, that he used to be a pilot or something, so he was actually able to keep his body under control when he's flying. So they managed to solve that a lot, because he, as an actor, actually solved a lot of the issues because of that fluid movement. So I mean, there's a lot of the cool stuff that goes back in time, all to Gollum, which is definitely very impressive, and I think it's still very impressive even today. I think it's still pretty timeless. You can still look at it and go, yeah, that looks good. It's still believable. It would be interesting to see a new Gollum if I think they were making a Hobbit TV show or something. So I'm imagining we get to see that again. Maybe that's
maybe Lord of the Rings series.
Yeah, maybe that's what you're gonna work on next year. Who knows?
I think it's weather actually. They're doing it weather now. Yeah.
So there's a lot of cool stuff. I mean, you also have because you worked on Fast and Furious also this year, didn't
you? Briefly, yes.
How was that?
It's crazy. I mean, not to say anything bad to all the fans, but I thought it was a comedy. I thought it was like they were making fun of it. But I mean, it's pretty crazy. Like I was sort of
there might be
yeah. I mean,
might be changing the mood a bit.
Maybe. I mean, they are funny. I mean, I think anybody who says it's like they know what they're gonna get, which is fine. But yeah. I mean, it was like there's a lot of CG cars. Like things are getting a lot crazier in those films. So yeah, like, but then it was very faithful to the photography. So we're matching plates, but we're making it look pretty. So I guess in that show, it was more, the brief was like, okay, make it real, make it match the plate, but then push it to 100, like make it look crazy shiny or crazy, lit and stuff like that. That's sort of what they want.
So in terms of realism, the cloud, I'm assuming the cloud thing was a bit time consuming to get right. And I believe rumor has it, someone else told me that it took a lot of iterations to get this right. So what happened? What's the deal with the clouds, and why is it
Yeah.
difficult?
Why is it difficult? I mean, clouds are always difficult, because once again, this comes back to photography. Like, what does a cloud look like? How does the light hit a cloud? Like if you've been in a plane, you've seen the clouds from above, and it's a totally different experience to what you see from the ground. The light is different. Like when suddenly the light's coming from the top, it's a different kind of thing. And you see on YouTube, you can look up footage of time lapse of clouds or whatever, but it's not real. Like it's not. None of that is what you really experience. And I guess I came to this sequence and yeah, I mean, it had been going around, and it was a very difficult thing to conceptualize because, if we're in a big machine, which a big studio is, and especially on a big film like Lion King, like when we were doing the whole thing, we had a lot of work to get through, and there has to be a certain machine running to get all that done. And when it comes to something like this, like it's very hard to work within that machine where it's like, oh, we need constant iterations. We need like this to change. Like we need to throw things at the wall and try something creative. It's very hard because like it could be months before you get a new version of something, right? So they made this sort of like small team, and they said, okay, well, it was myself as the lighter, and at the time, like just one compositor and the comp supervisor, the VFX supervisor, and the effects supervisor, and two effects artists. So basically, they were creating the clouds and the effects, and then I would light them. We did, we did the whole show in Katana, but this I ended up lighting in Houdini just because it was a lot easier to make iterations while I was in the same software as the effects artists. So I basically ported my lights into Houdini and recreated what we were seeing. So basically, yeah, they asked if we had any new ideas, and that was a tough question because the first thing I did was I went back to the original and I had a look at what this was, because it's an important scene in the original film, and it's one that a lot of people who saw it growing up were very attached to, and I still don't think they forgive us for remaking it. But I mean, like this is what you got to do. But he sees his dad, and as you can see, like in this sequence, the first thing I noticed was like every shot is a unique idea. Like it's totally different. Like first he's a cloud. First it's like, okay, what is that? There's a cloud and he's a shadow, and then it cuts back and it's like, what is some smoke swirling around? Like it's a spell. It's not a cloud anymore. No, he's sort of like a ghosty phantasm. Like it's all so crazy. And then what? He's Jesus, right? So, when you're breaking this down, none of it's real. Like none of it makes sense photographically. And then what? He's disappearing into smoke and guard rays and everything, right?
But this is the challenge, right? We talked about it a few times now. Is the difference between 2D painting, photography, our eye, and games. It's always making these hard decisions. So this was obviously a difficult decision. So what did you end up doing? Copying? Or did you just not do it?
Well, I mean, we
I
did a
don't
bunch of
remember.
things. So I mean, essentially, if you break it down, what did we need? We needed the idea of Mufasa being in the clouds. We needed the scale to be real, and that was something that we really tried to work on. Was like this idea that like if you think about like how clouds are, like they're so far away, and they are massive. Like they in terms of like, and we tried to sorry, we tried to make like a realistic scale of like this 5 kilometer cloud in 3D, and that's how I started lighting it. Was we the effects super, he created this massive, like based on an actual sculpt of the face. Um, he turned that into a cloud in Houdini and presented that as a model. And then we went back and forth and like, is it is his hair part of the cloud? Like because his hair in the model was hair. So like does that cloud, like what's the texture of that? Because where do you find the face? Where do the eyes come from? And we went around in circles. And then what's the base? Because a real cloud has a strong base if it's going to be fluffy. You know, like you've got these cumulostratus like
Also,
rain clouds.
did you research the different clouds? Because there's quite a
Yeah,
few of them, right?
yeah,
It's so
exactly.
tedious.
So yeah, the idea like being that like this is a nighttime cloud, but then it clears away to present the sun in the morning. So it has to be sort of like a feathery look at the end, where you know, like realistic scientifically, what when the clouds clear, what kind of clouds are they? So we sort of went through the different cloud formations as it went, and it's morphing, but it's not morphing as much as it used to. So like in the old one, it's crazy. Every shot it changes, as I said, and it's like all over the place. But we tried to keep something a little bit more subdued and sticking to this initial shape. So what it is in the end, you know, sort of like, and I love this reflection shot. I unfortunately I didn't like this, but I think that the guys who lit the original sequence, like leading up to this, did a really good job of the nighttime stuff as well. This is a beautiful shot of Simba. I think like this is like showing off the model to its extent, and then just like this reveal. And when you see it with the sound, it's really special, because we were sort of like in this vacuum, and we're like, it's sure it's gonna work, it's gonna work, and I keep telling the supervisor, yeah, it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine. And then when you see it with the sound and the lightning strike, and you know, like this sort of reveal in the cinema, it is quite powerful. I know, like we got a lot of criticism where it's like, you know, why'd you change it? Can't see anything, and that's fine. You know, like it's valid criticism. You can't really see a face, but that's the decision we had to make in the end, because like the more we showed the face, the worse it looked. Like the more like Mount Rushmore it was, or the more like sculpted it was, the more we lost the reality. So the first thing I did was I came in and I set up the lights in a way that gave it this moonlight feel that fit into the other sequence. So that was the main thing that was happening, was like it wasn't fitting in. Like there was just this cloud that didn't cut with a shot of Simba's face, right? So I thought about, where's the moonlight, and I took my moonlight setup and I said, well, okay, let's just sculpt the edges of this cloud and try to highlight the little variances so that you can lose a little bit of the detail, because believe me, there's a lot of detail in this cloud. Like it's going into like minute, like crazy little things that probably you could have just gone like nuts and just be like, let's show every textural bump of this thing. But I just wanted to be like, the idea, like the whole point is like, you just have to look at the image and be like, I think I see that. And that's what I feel emotionally from what Simba's going through, is like, is it really his dad, or is it his imagination? And that's the thing, is like, when you look at a cloud, do you really see a giraffe or an elephant, or is it your imagination? Of course it's your imagination. So that's the idea, is like this hint towards something really being there.
Are you
And we
telling me Santa Claus doesn't exist?
and yeah, and we played with the idea of like, you see the lightning strike, so you know, like you get this idea of like, you know, there's a nose, you know, barely visible, you know, and it's just catching the light, as it did in the other sequence, you know, like this sort of moonlight casting across and just taking the details of his face. And then it's slowly morphing as well. You know, we had this beautiful reference, which I couldn't find, but of time lapse of different storms and different hurricanes and clouds, and this idea that the clouds were constantly changing, and the more they change and more they hit the light, the more you imagine, the more you meaning you put into it. So basically, we had a simulation of the static cloud form, and then Jade, the effects artist, who did an incredible job on this, she created these sims of clouds sort of moving across the face, so that as if it was sort of like constantly morphing, constantly changing. And then, you know, we again, that caused problems, because you lose the shape of the face, you lose the whole meaning of the cloud. So it was a balancing act of trying to find, like, you know, when does it hit the light, when does it light up, when does it point to the tourist attractions, when does it say like, this is where the eye is, this is where the mouth is. And it's very rare. You see, like there's this stencil that the compositors made of the lightning, that so basically I rendered a few passes where can't stop, yeah, sort of can stop. where basically we had the beauty of the outside of the cloud, and then it had another pass of like different lightning hits of lights inside the density of the cloud, and that was a real challenge as well, trying to replicate the density of the cloud and how light travels through it, because that's something that we know as well, because we've seen lightning, but we haven't seen lightning. You know, when you really look at it, it's like the most beautiful, beautiful trees of energy that sort of like light in such an odd way. And what I found in these reference images is like the density and the scale. And that's something that's really hard to reproduce, because like in CG, obviously, like you can only trace so many levels. You know, like it's not going to see, like, you know, in a real cloud, in a real eye, you might see a light inside a cloud that's like 500 kilometers away. You know, like it could still travel all the way through the cloud, whereas in CG that's so hard to reproduce. So I tried a few different things. One, we had like an actual lightning geometry. So we simulated lightning strands in different things, and I was able to create the shapes. And then I used that as a mesh light inside different parts of the clouds, and then we could draw like little, you know, like stems inside the cloud, lighting up different parts of it. And it was good. I mean, like it was a nice sort of like base for turning on and off the lightning in comp, but it wasn't quite right, and it was too distracting. Like if it just showed up anywhere, you'd look at that. So that was the problem. Is like suddenly you'd lose the face if you suddenly, like, if it just showed up like, you know, here.
Right.
It'd be like, oh, okay, now I'm looking there. That's where something's going to happen. So that's why we went back to this idea of this stencil. So basically the comp just painted like the main parts of the nose and the mouth, and then we used the 3D lighting to kind of like flash that on in certain parts of the face. So that's what you see, and it was just a balancing act of getting that timing right, and syncing it with the sound and making it look like lightning is going on behind the surface, but what it's doing is it's bringing the focus to the face. So yeah, I mean that was really, really a tough
So
balance to try and
is
figure
it common that a lighting artist lights the VFX?
out. For me, yeah. I tend to do it just because, like, I guess I've done it enough in the past. This,
Clearly, you have the time.
I mean, if you can do it quickly, you can do it. Um, it it depends on the studio. Like often, you know, they will render smoke and sort of cloud and things like that in Houdini, and just have the effects artist do it. We have gone back and forth on Lion King, and actually on Cats, I did a cloud as well, where I set up a beauty lighting, and then I set up light rig in Houdini, and then the Houdini artist, as he did his iterations on the cloud, used those same lights to reproduce it, so that we had a render from Houdini and we had a render from Katana that we could sort of fuse between in comp. So yeah, like it depends on the shot, it depends on the show, and it depends on the effect. Like generally, if it's like a Marvel sort of magic effect, so something it's emanating light, or that is like a laser or something like that, that'll come from straight from Houdini, because that's not lighting. That's not you're not going to light a laser, you know. But then we'll get that geometry, and then we'll light the interactive light. So if the laser casts a laser, we take that geometry, or we create a light that simulates that, and then light that up in the scene. So, you know, I guess I got an example here actually of Avengers. So that's the oops. So this is just some cat stuff. I'm not going to go into cats, but there you go. There's like this more fantastical sort of cloud stuff. So this is all full CG clouds that we lit. The shot's a lot longer in the film, but anyways, here it is again. I was talking about Avengers, right? So, you know, this sort of thing, like this kind of laser, that's done out of effects, but then I would have to recreate the interactive light on the character, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't render the laser. same with this one. So I lit everything in the shot, like the environment and the character and everything, but then of course the laser is coming from effects. And then I had an interactive light that comp could turn off and on. The dust I lit, so the dust I would get from effects and I would light because it has to sit in the environment. In this case, you can see, like, this is the one I was looking for, is this Corvus shot of, obviously he's shooting a laser, which I didn't have, but what I did was I got the mesh from effects, and I think I ended up using some cylinder lights, and I basically just extended the cylinders out and used those and colored them the same as the laser, and sort of like had them on different AOVs so that I could sort of control like how much was hitting his face. This one was, again, it was a balancing act, because like if that laser was really there, his face would just be blown out flat, you know. So it was, once again, it was like, how do you keep him sort of in the shadows and dark and evil looking when he's got this massive light source in front of his face? So I sort of like used a bit of liberty and said, well, this light source is the strongest one, and that's how a camera would work, is like the camera would favor the strongest source, even though there's a lot of light, and that's how the shadow would work. So I'm saying, like, you know, this light is hitting a lot, and then it's just falling off to shadow. So yeah, I guess does that answer your question? Like,
Yeah. I'm just
and
watching the rest of your reel while while you're talking as well.
same with this. Like, there's smoke trails that came, and I would have had to do the shader and try to get them working and have them in the environment. Ironically, for this shot, I didn't like the environment, so it was such a big set that the environment guys ended up lighting it with all the sort of like set lighting based off the real train station in Edinburgh. And then I just did a shadow pass because it's mostly characters and the effects and stuff like that. But predominantly, I guess I've been lucky enough. If it's a CG shot, I get to do the whole thing.
So you can just let it play in the background.
Sure.
So as a lead lighting artist, what are the key things you would look for if you were to be a decision maker in hiring someone to join a team? What are the things you look for?
It's funny, yeah, I mean, it depends on the understanding of light, I guess, like the willingness to learn. I mean, I think that anybody can do it to an extent, but it's the ability to sort of have that eye and see what's required before you start working. I think that, like, yeah, I mean, I'd look at anybody's work, even if it's very primitive, or it's like, you know, just a dome or a square in a room. I'd love to see somebody like that, you know, like, I mean, it sounds like such a cliche, but like, show me a render of a teapot, and if you've done something interesting with it, then I'd love to see that. Like, that's sort of it. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be technically perfect, and that's not really what I need. And like, I've been lucky enough, as you know, from my path, is to not come from a technical background, and I was, when I was hired at Fuel, they knew that that's not what people need. You don't need somebody who knows exactly, you know, how many rays are tracing per pixel when they start. You know, that's great that you know that, but I mean, like, that's something that you can learn. What you can't learn is how to be creative. What you can't learn is the eye. Like, that takes a really long time to get right, to know what it should look like, what that balance is, and how to, like, you know, like, figure out what's important in the story and in the shot. So if you can show that in a simple setup, then I'm sold. You know, like, that's something that can translate to massive shots. And it's always going to come back to it. Like, yeah, if you're lighting a massive environment in space with some spaceships and stuff, you're going to need a lot of technical skills and you're going to need a lot of experience. But at the same time, it all comes down to, like, manipulating that light and finding that balance and knowing what's important in the shot. So yeah, that's what I would look for. I would look for somebody who can show me, like, what a real camera would photograph, you know, like, how light would really work, and just try to get an understanding of emotion in lighting.
Cool. Do you have any final words before we close down this session?
Um,
Do you have an art station or anything?
I do, but I don't really put stuff on it. I mean, as I said, it's really hard for me because like I don't focus on one thing. I think that I would probably have progressed a lot further if I had have just stuck with one thing. And I think that's different schools of thought. I think that like if you're going to be a lighter and you just want to be a lighter, then you can definitely just hone a specific skill and be incredible at it. And for sure, you'd be better than me at it. Like like for sure. But I get bored. Like I just want to try new things. I just want to like be challenged creatively. I don't want to get bogged down in the technical details all the time. And maybe that's a detriment to my work. Like maybe it's not always technically perfect, but I just don't care that much about technical perfection. Like I just want it to feel right. I just want it to be a creatively sound idea.
So, would you say for the people who are not really technically savvy, even struggle technically speaking? Because I mean, being a lighting artist is both artistic and technical. Is like there's two sides, those sides for it, especially in games. Because in games you have frame rate, you have technical
Right.
limitations. There's a lot more to it than just rendering and waiting and getting. Guess getting away with it, so it's different in that context as well. So what do you say to those people who are insecure in that area? Do you have any thoughts in saying that it is possible to have a successful career as a lighting artist, as long as you're able to do the minimum technical work, I guess, and do the storytelling, the visual storytelling, and understanding how light work, basically?
Well, I mean, I guess I sort of gave the wrong impression there. I would say probably my job is 90% technical anyway. So I mean, like it's not like I can get away with not understanding the software. Unfortunately, I really wish I didn't have to do so much technical work, but that's just the way it goes. Like you're working on these very complicated software and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't want to downplay what I mean technically is I mean like more what I was talking about with the lighting, like like does it have to be perfectly exposed in every area of the frame? Does it have to be, like do you have to nibble away at the little details? Like that's the stuff that I don't really care about. Like I know a lot of people are obsessed with sort of like everything has to be like absolute perfection, but like look at this shot. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. Like it's a bad lion falls off cliff into deathly smoke and fire. Like
Well,
you don't
let's
need
be
to see
fair.
everything.
Most people wouldn't know if it's perfect or not, to be
Exactly. Yeah,
honest.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not going to talk about like that fire sim that wasn't perfect. But anyways, no, like the effects were really, really beautifully done. But anyways, like we struggle with stuff like that, and there's a lot of technical problems. And yes, of course, you're going to have to understand the technical part. If you're struggling with it, I don't think it's the end of the world. You'll learn it, but you just have to put the work in. And yeah, of course, some people's brains are wired differently, but I think like just the idea is like if I think about all the software I know and all the technical stuff that I know compared to when I started the industry, I would just have an aneurysm straight away when I started talking to my young self, like because there's so much to know, but you don't learn it all at once. You just learn it a little bit every day, and that's all you have to do is like every day challenge yourself, push yourself,
Mm.
and learn something else. Try something new. If someone says, "Can you do this?" You say, "Of course I can." Of course you can because you can. Have I ever done it before? No, but you'll figure it out. You will, and
Yeah,
that's something that holds people back.
you'll just work weekends for the next 4 years.
Yeah, well, don't do that. If you're working too many weekends, come see me and I'll talk to your boss.
Yeah. So
Because
since you mentioned the fire scene, is there a reason it's pretty dark considering all the flames?
I think just because it's just because because I like that. Is there a reason it's dark? Yes. So, not to go into too much detail, but like the idea was like they're on a massive cliff away from all the fire, and the only light source is fire lit smoke. So as you can see in the shot, like all the fire is down below, and we in the scene at the bottom of the cliff, we had a lot more directional fire hitting their faces and things like that. But then once again, it's nighttime and it's fire and it's the smoke. And I didn't really talk about it, but I was lucky enough to have a sit down with Caleb Deschanel, who was the DOP on The Lion King, and go through this some of the shots in this sequence. And he had a lot of stuff to talk about. And he said, like, this is fine. Like you can have it dark, but you just have to push a little bit further. And that was the idea. Was like the brief from him was like, yes, it's night and it's smoke and it's emotionally it's a very dark scene because it's just the climax of the film. Like it has to be dark because the emotions are dark. The things that Scar is saying is dark. The things that Simba is saying is dark. He's telling him to leave forever. It's this final confrontation. So dark mood means dark light. So that's sort of I guess why they let me get away with it. But that was the idea. Was like
it's because it's a common technique, isn't it, to have a visible light source in the distance? Because in the shot before, a few seconds ago, when you were talking, you can see the one little bit before that, the one after that. This one, yeah, you can see the light on the face, but you don't actually see the light on the ground coming anywhere. I've noticed a lot of common technique to show the light source. The idea of the light source is nearby, and then you focus on the object, the main key thing, which is the character, obviously, and not everything else. Is that a common thing you do, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was really important. It's always important for me to have a source, because it's not only is it good for me in my brain to figure out where the light's coming from, it helps with the continuity and it helps with being able to sell it, because a lot of the time that's what you're doing is you're selling it to somebody else. And you're saying, well, they say, well, why is the light from here? You say, well, because of this and because of that. And that's how you get approved shots, because like if they, otherwise it can be like, whoa, where's the light coming from? Maybe it's coming from the left, maybe it's the right, maybe it's halfway up, maybe it's coming from below, maybe it's coming from here. But why does it come from somewhere else? Because of the source. So I was lucky enough that in the previs that Caleb had done with the guys, he had and created a small fire on top of the cliff. So when they get close to the wall, in reality, the wall would block every light that ever comes from anything. So there'd just be darkness. And that's why you see like there is a dark side close to camera, because most of the camera shots are coming from the wall. So that was a creative decision that DP made. The fact that there's a fire there, that gives us this little rim light. So there is a fire that you see sort of later when he grabs the coals, and that's a story point, that there's this tiny little bushfire that has some coals coming out of it. And the fact that it's a story point gives us the liberty to be like, okay, well, there's a little bit of light on top of the cliff, but most of it's coming from this ambient smoke. And the more the smoke gets red and powerful, the more emotional it becomes, the more dramatic it becomes. And that was the idea, is like use the smoke and the fire as this impending doom. It's this hell idea of like surrounded by flames. That's the drama. So that's why it's sort of dark.
So the smoke creates the indirect lighting, the bounce light, which is that a smoke realistic thing? Is that what happens? I know fog does it, but not sure.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent. I mean, it wouldn't be this defined. I think that, yeah, like if you were, and we looked at a lot of footage from the Australia bushfires and like not last year's ones, but years ago, and from the California bushfires, there were a lot of people who filmed, and often it was just from their phones, but you can see like how powerful the smoke is as a light. Like when you get that much fire, which was the idea that it's a lot of fire in this area, it does light up. Like the fire just goes crazy inside this smoke, and the smoke can actually contribute quite a lot of light on the streets and things like that. But then like it doesn't, whereas you'll have firelight will create a specular highlight. The smoke light doesn't have that. So that's why this light is a lot more diffused. It's a lot more soft than a firelight would be. So as that shot you just looked at, like that light that was rim lighting his face, that's a firelight, whereas this is more of a smoke light. I don't think. Yeah. Sorry.
So another question is, because I'm not a fire expert by any means, is how do you decide the range and intensity of the fire? Because a lot of times you'll have like a torch and you have to figure out the range and intensity. But in this case, you have a whole area of fire, or obviously for creative reasons you're toning it down rather than up. But in general sense, do you have any knowledge in terms of the actual intensity of a torchlight or a bonfire or a campfire or this
Yeah.
kind of lighting? Is there something you researched that you could tell?
Well, once again, this comes from live action, but like, yeah, we did a lot of tests on creating the actual Kelvin temperature of fire. Um, we sort of went back and forth on, like, using an actual fire simulation. So we had fires that effects had created that we could turn into mesh and then use that as a mesh light. The problem with the mesh light is it's very it's very sort of uncontrollable, and fire itself is very uncontrollable. So I know from shooting actual on live action films, when you shoot with a fire or a candle, it's a very unpredictable light because it can range from a crazy amount of exposure range, and you'll end up with some dark frames and some overexposed frames. So you can't actually use it. So what they'll do in a film set is they'll have the fire in shot, perhaps, if they have to, but then they'll have a light off to the side that somebody's like doing this in front of, and it's literally all that. Like nowadays they probably use an LED and they have like an actual texture which is similar to what we used. And then that will create the flickering effect on the face that tells the audience that the firelight is creating this, but it's not real. It's not real. And if you go out into a real fire and you really stand in front of a campfire, you'll see it with your own eyes, like at night, that it's all over the place. And you just can't get away with that. Like as much as I'd love to make a film like that, where some frames are just black, no one's ever going to prove that, because like, especially in this scene where like you need to see the character's face. You need to see it. So this is a poetic license that you take because you're telling a story. Like there's no way you can get away with like an emotional moment on Simba's face in the darkness, like when it's absolutely black.
So is there any time you would have said, when you were testing it or any other scene that has fire in it, is there any time you would go and say, okay, the range is too far, that doesn't make sense, it doesn't go that far? Or has it been like, it's okay that it's going this far in terms of its range or radius?
Yeah, I mean, not to speak out of turn, I wasn't super happy with the way that this turned out in the end. I think that we could have gone um, a lot more dramatic, and I think that there were definitely early tests that we did that looked better. Not to say anything bad about it. Like looking back at it, I'm fine with it. I think it's great, but it's always like that. It's always, as I said before, like you could always do better, and you could always make it look more real or more emotional and more. And even the shot itself, like this, like a week before, like this shot was a much wider frame of his face, and it was a beautifully composed shot. And we sort of like they cut closer just because we needed a little bit more emotional impact in the edit, and that changes the lighting, and that's fine. I mean, that's a collaboration of filmmaking. That's the way that you work together. But I mean, like, it doesn't have to always be beautiful. And that's the whole point. Is like, just because it's a beautiful shot doesn't mean it has to be in the film. It has to be emotional, and it has to be that emotion that you need exactly at that moment in the edit.
So how do
And
you
it was
decide these emotions though?
how do I what?
Decide on the emotions, like, because it's a visual language, but it's not necessarily, arguably, it's not necessarily a universal visual language. I mean, different cultures, different,
Absolutely.
like Bollywood and different cultures, even in terms of music, I've learned there's happy music in Eastern Europe. There's actually funeral music in some countries in Asia. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
play, and when they hear it in movies, they get sad and they find it not offensive, but they react differently to something I would listen to and I would be happy. So I think it's the same with visual language, especially as a uh, even though I'm born in Norway, I have Indian inheritance and heritage. So I've watched a lot of Bollywood movies, and that's very colorful. It's different visual language.
Yeah.
They pop a lot more. They have a very different creative cinematography as well that you don't often see in Western culture, and or vice versa. So how do you make that decision that it's emotional? Do you have to trust your emotion, or do you measure it somehow? Because I don't necessarily trust my emotions when I look at an image going, yeah, I'm happy, no, I'm sad. I don't really base my emotions as the anchor point of an image. So how do you go on about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I think to an extent I do. Like, I mean, I think that maybe I'm fooling myself, but yeah, I do connect to it in a way. And yeah, I make those decisions based on how I feel looking at it. But then of course I'm working for somebody else, and yeah, I try to think what the director will really wanted. And I guess in this kind of instance, like I have the beauty of there was already a film of this made. There was already somebody, did this quite well. And I whenever I started on a sequence, I look back at the old scene, but then I didn't necessarily take lighting cues or anything from that, just the emotional impact. But I by this stage, I knew what the supervisor wanted, and I knew what the director wanted. So, and as I said, I talked to Caleb, who initially set up the shots, and I guess that all plays into it. What would they connect to, and what would the audience connect to? That's something that I guess has been a strength of mine, is the empathy to figure out what people will connect to. And yeah, it's different cultures, but I mean, sadness, death, um, darkness. I mean, that's universal. Like,
That brings me to the next question, and that's: do you think to be a good artist, in this case, lighting artist, you need to have a certain level of emotional experience, emotional uh, know-how, emotional empathy to really be able to tell the story in terms of light and color? Because even though we do a lot of technical stuff, and you can do a lot just generally because of references and listening to what other people say, do you think some artists might stand out because they have certain life experience and emotions and empathy, and they're more emotional, that they are able to create pieces that are just more emotional and easier to connect with people?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I hated when people told me that when I was young.
Because
But
I am
you
not
know,
a very emotional person, so when I
yeah,
make my pieces, I need some other input to be sure that I am going to the right direction. I cannot just light the piece and go, I feel very scared or very sad, because I
okay,
need
yeah,
to know from a cultural point of view that is correct, but I also need to know the visual language people are used to, to be sure. Um, a
yeah,
lot of my work is dark because I don't watch horror movies. I don't play horror games because after I watched Exorcist when I was a teenager and the girl went down the stairs, I was
yeah,
scarred for life. So ever since that day, I've never watched any horror movies. So I can do dark scenes. I can do horror quite easily because I do have an association to it. But then, and I can do happy scenes because I love happy movies. I love high school teenager movies with bright color and just bright tone. I love animation movies that are colorful. But then there are certain scenes that require sadness or very specific mood that is neither being scared and it's neither being happy, but all the other emotions. I do think that's a bit harder to pull off. If you haven't experienced a lot of certain emotions in your life, if you have a generally problem-free life, I think you have a bit challenge in terms of doing it. But then I lost my mom and dad. I lost my mom in 2012 and I became more emotional. And I lost my dad during COVID a couple of months ago and I
oh
became
no, I'm
more
sorry.
emotional. So now I am able to, there's certain things that makes me cry now in movies and TV shows that I wouldn't cry over before. And it's noticeable certain loving scenes with parents and stuff that I just collapse now. Before I would just watch it and go, what is this? And now I'm really emotional when I watch these things. So there's certain upgrades to my artistic skills, I guess, because of these events that have happened. So I have come to a conclusion that if you don't go out there and make yourself a bit more emotional, vulnerable, I think it hampers your creative skills when it comes to this storytelling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, I agree absolutely. I don't think it just extends to this. I think it's every creative endeavor that you have. I think that, and it's everything that you experience in life. Like, is related to some other experience. Like you experience it because of what you've gone through, and you create because of what you've gone through. So yeah, I mean, it's like I think Paul Schrader, great screenwriter, he said that years ago. He was saying that like he was disillusioned with what was coming out in like the early 2000s was a lot of sarcasm and a lot of irony, and he said that basically that's people's excuse for not emoting. So what they're doing is like they're creating irony because they don't really connect to it. And he was coming from a point of view of this life of he came from a pretty dark place before he started writing like Taxi Driver and all these sort of dark films of the 70s. And he channeled like that kind of experience that he had. And I think that's the difference, is like you can see, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like there's plenty of content out there that no one cares about, like that is just like a very superficial presentation, like a commercial. I always see like commercials are very manipulative, emotional experiences where they're taking something that everyone universally emotes and relates to, and they're feeding it back to them and saying like, do you connect to this? Now buy this, and that's the essence of big media and creativity.
My answer is no, but that's because I learned about marketing very early that they manipulate me. So now I'm like, yeah, I know you're manipulating me. Not gonna work.
Well, I mean, like this is what I'm doing right now. Like I'm manipulating the audience in The Lion King, and it may not always work, but that's the idea. Is like storytelling is manipulation, and it's recreating those emotions, that just so that you can have a shared experience. And maybe it's I don't know if it's a more admirable way of doing it, because I mean this movie made over $1 billion, so it's like it was a commercial as well. So I mean, I don't know, morally I don't know if it's any better, but what I'm saying is like everything artistic is manipulation. Like everything is like recreating emotion, and it should be, because that's how we connect as a species. Like we have to share emotion because that's our nature. So if you haven't experienced it, then you're not going to get it, and you're not going to be able to reproduce it. You can on a superficial level, but then you won't know why it's wrong. And that's the thing, is like you don't know those decisions.
Guess that's the newest advice here at Lighting Bot that no one has told you before. You want to be a good lighting artist or an artist, make sure you go into bad situations, horrific situations, so you can feel it and then recreate it. There you have it.
Yeah,
I think
man.
there's some truth in it as well, because I've grown up in Norway a lot, and London is, I guess, similar in a sense. But I also think where you're from matters, the country you live in, because there's cultural impact and how you associate, black color is in Western country related to funeral, black dress and stuff. In India, it's white clothes, so it's the opposite there. And then you have black in certain countries if you're widow, or I don't know the other word, if you're a man without a wife. I guess it's the same or something. But yeah, those things matter as well, but also how you grow up. Because if you're like in a country like Norway, it's always dark. It's like we have dark winter, as we call it.
Right.
It's the extra month that we have in Norway, which is super dark. It's 2 hours maybe of light, and then it's just dark, and but it's not as depressing as it might get, say, in London, because in Norway you have the white snow to kind of mix up that emotion, that it's still like the snow is more of a cozy dark feeling, especially when you have all the warm lights on, so you don't get the same like sad kind of feeling. But here in London, when it gets around the darker times,
Miserable,
yeah, it's maybe some rain and there's no snow, and the lighting as well matches. So I do think the country and the experience, how you experience summer, how you experience winter, kind of also impacts your association with mood when it comes to these seasons. And I've noticed that because I've traveled now a few times. So my association to summer from Norway and France is two different associations. And also here in the UK, the summer here, I wouldn't really call it a proper summer whatsoever. The Bordeaux was wonderful, was one of my best times, and it was a good time for me to learn about these things as well, because when you're traveling, you get to experience things like Bordeaux. They have the sea to start the direction. I think it's the Atlantic Ocean or something. So the sunset is a bit different. in certain time than in Norway, and it's a different experience. So you see it differently, you can feel it differently. While I haven't experienced it properly here yet in London, because there's too many buildings and it blocks the view, but you get
Yeah.
nice views on the buildings
Mhm.
instead.
Mhm.
So you have a different emotion. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and it's a different topic which not a lot of people address at all. I think it's a lot of technical talk and stuff, but it's not a lot of real life. How do you associate yourself with lighting? How do you incorporate that into your lighting, and how does that work for you? And I think about it a lot when I watch stuff. It's like, am I feeling what the person intended me to feel, or is there something wrong with me if I don't feel what they intended me to feel?
Yeah.
It's also interesting.
Well, sometimes that's
Uh,
better. Like if you feel like you should have your own connection. There's a French film, I can't remember what it's called, but I saw it once where God makes a film, and basically like he comes uh, and I think he sort of possesses people and then gets them to do different parts in the film, and the film gets made. And when it gets shown, you don't see what's on the screen, but you see everybody coming out and thanking the director and saying like, I can't believe you had that moment from that I related to as a child. The next person be like, oh, I can't believe you captured this so well, like, and everybody has a different experience, and that's the whole idea, is like, if you can make something that universal, then everyone should project their own emotion on it and feel that and take that away, which is really hard to do. Like, I mean, that's not the kind of films that I'm working on. This is more of a sort of like, what have you felt before sort of thing. Let's repurpose that. Whereas if you're watching, say, like a David Lynch film or a Stanley Kubrick film or something that is presented in such a way that you can interpret it your own way. Like, you can be like, well, what does that really mean? Well, I feel like that means that, and that's okay. But that's a different level of mastery of storytelling. Like, that's something on a whole cerebral sort of like psychological way.
Yeah, that's why I'm learning painting, because I feel painting does it very well. The artist has an intention, but what different people interpret the painting differently.
Yes.
Uh, that's why I picked up painting more than I picked up photography right now. Even though I am gonna ship my photography equipment from Norway and pick up that too. What fascinated me with the painting compared to cinematic, and when you compare what people say about visual language, is for some reason when people look at painting, they don't often end up with the same conclusion. While if you look at this shot or other shot, most people will end up with the same conclusion, same feeling, and also be able to say and state some of the universal things. While with painting, something else happens with us, and I'm trying to explore why that is for a lot of people. Even though there is an intention, there is a mood from Monet and other pieces. There's a clear intention, but a lot of people will say they feel and think differently, and there's a different story to it. So it's definitely a topic for another time, I think.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, it's fascinating. I think I've kept you long enough. So what I'm gonna do is just quickly repeat for the viewers the stuff that Lighting Bot do, as you have already listened, with the exclusive 2 hours and 17 minutes, which is the longest stream, maybe the second or the longest stream we've had so far.
Sorry.
We have had one before with a recruiter, where we talk about lighting recruitment and give people advice
Okay,
on
cool.
those things. So a reminder, we do portfolio review, so you can come over to Discord. I'm not sure if Lucas have joined yet, but he's free to join as well. Community highlight, so we can highlight your pieces. We have Unreal tutorials by Sorop, who's a technical lighter artist at Turn 10, I believe. Me, I'm using Unity at work during daytime, so I'm focusing my tutorials on that, because there's not a lot of good tutorials for Unity because everyone is using Unreal, so there's a market for that. Lighting mentorship, if you want to learn more about the artistic part, and we have other people for the technical parts. A lot of other talks, so you guys can watch different topics, Lego projects. Tildman, who's quite known in the gaming community as Deadless, has a good talk and breakdown. So have a watch. So I think, Lucas, I'll talk to you in private after we end the stream. to get your feedback a little bit and stuff like that. Other than that, I think we should wave goodbye for everyone and say thank you for everything. And of course, Lucas as well. Thank you for attending and giving me your valuable time as well. I appreciate it as much as you
No
can
problem.
imagine. So thank you, everyone.